Call the meeting to order. Welcome everybody here this evening. Larry's not going to be with us. He's on vacation this week, so I hope he's off having a good time somewhere. So anyway, we'll get right to it. Do we have a quorum for the planning board? No, we don't.
No, not yet. Hopefully somebody will arrive, but the state statute only requires the public hearing component of it be before the Board of Commissioners.
I understand that, but I would still like for them to hear it, and that's why I was asking. So,
I agree.
now they can come and listen to the tapes.
That's correct.
So, all right. Okay. First item then is QA 2020-03A text amendment, section 6.2 of the UDO. Michael.
Good afternoon, Mr. Mayor, members of the board. First of all, before I forget, thank you all for those who participated in the discussions about the comprehensive master plan. I wanted to make sure I thanked you in person before I forgot again. The first of the quarterly text amendments before you tonight is a text amendment, specifically section 6.2 of our Unified Development Ordinance. As you may be aware, when we changed our from a zoning code to a Unified Development Ordinance, we did open up several new items in essentially the toolbox, which is the UDO. One of those is revising the conservation subdivision regulations. In some ways, it made it easier for developers to really work with some of the lands that had environmentally sensitive or challenging locations, and it created certain incentives for them to allow for these infill developments. However, one unforeseen consequence was there were some provisions in there that did not really take into context the intent of the conservation subdivision. So tonight, staff is proposing a modification from the current regulations to prohibit what's called mass grading. Currently, the regulations allow for essentially the entire site to be cleared with the exception of the environmentally sensitive lands. As shown on the site plan, those would be your wetlands, potentially floodplains, those items. Additionally, we do have stream buffer requirements in which they are not allowed to grade into it, and then other areas that may be preserved as part of the Unified Development Ordinance. We do have some open space requirements, but they're still allowed to grade into those. Essentially, our UDO, in terms of grading, would allow for something like this. That one lone tree in the back is the only remaining vegetation that was original to this site. As you can see, everything else is very flat. There's no native natural vegetation other than what the homeowners have planted. And that water tower that you see off and to the right, that's in an entirely different neighborhood across a major arterial collector street. Currently, our regulations would allow for this type of grading to occur. What the town is proposing is a restriction in the time and method of grading. It would allow for grading of roadway infrastructure at the time of construction for the overall development, utility infrastructure such as water, sewer, natural gas, storm drains, and then both of those could happen as soon as the construction drawings are signed. One change would not allow for the residential lots to be independently graded until they receive the building permit to go do so. The front portions would have to be graded in order for the water meter box to be installed, because that would be part of the utility connection, but it would not allow for the grading of the entire site. What this does is it preserves the natural vegetation as well as the natural topography, which is kind of an identifying characteristic for a lot of municipalities. Sure, architectural details kind of differentiate town or different neighborhoods, but also the undulation of the roads, the hills, how the lots are configured. It does take a little bit more work for engineers to work into get a creative design, but it actually adds value in the end. And one thing to note is this would only be applicable to the conservation subdivisions. If somebody came in with a traditional subdivision or a bungalow court or one of the several other options for residential development, this mass grading would not apply to them. This is essentially what this prohibition would allow. It's in this particular context, And this is actually located up in Wake Forest in the Heritage neighborhood. You can see the road on the right goes uphill, the road on the left goes downhill, and the large stands of trees that are scattered throughout the neighborhood are part of the natural vegetation from, that remained from when the development was first constructed. The areas that were excavated were specific to where the housing sites were going to be, as opposed to clearing the entire lot.
Was that first picture of a conservation development?
No, that
Okay.
one is, well, it meets the details of the conservation subdivision as it currently stands in our UDO, but that particular community is located within Wake County jurisdiction outside of Knightdale.
Okay, thanks.
And I'm available if you have any questions regarding this item.
I have just a couple. I understand what you're trying to achieve, and I'm not opposed to it, but just thinking about it, it seems to me that sometimes when you're grading adjacent lots, you might want to move some dirt or need to move from this lot to this lot. Under this scenario, they would not be able to do that with it.
Well, they could. In order for the individual lots to be graded, you have to pull a building permit.
I understand.
And in other municipalities that have this regulation, what they'll do is, and actually our developers do it now naturally, is they'll pull bank permits as opposed to one here, one here. They'll pull lots 25 through 30 as an example.
Okay.
And that allows for them to have that flexibility to make sure that they can move soil from one location to the other.
As long as there's a method to do that. Now, the next question that I had was, had to do with the peripheral land that is set aside as part of the conservation subdivision. Does this not allow any development in that land at all, i.e. walking trails, athletic field, or something of that nature?
Well, this would not, this text would not modify those regulations because they would not be able to do mass grading into those locations anyways. However, we do allow for passive recreation and even open space where, for that percentage where it was partially cleared, it could be reforested or replanted in order for it to count towards that future preservation.
Well, I wasn't looking towards or even insinuating that it would be mass grading out there. It's just, I know that, I think we used to call these architectural subdivisions, it seemed like some time ago, but when we first put that in Zebulon, we were thinking that some of that property that could not be built on would be available for recreation. So you're saying that's still there?
That is still there, but it's a passive recreation. It
Oh,
doesn't
I
allow
get it.
for the construction of any infrastructure such as pergolas or gazebos or other elements. But walking trails, natural bike paths, greenways even, all of those would be permissible.
Just open recreation field?
Yes, as long as it's just open and there's
I
no
got it.
other
Okay.
improvements.
All right, that's all I had. Thank you.
Thank you.
Other questions? All right. I don't see anybody here, but for the record, I'll ask if there's anybody who'd like to speak on this issue. Or did the planning board have any questions? No? Okay. All right, no one wants to speak, so we'll close the public hearing, refer the matter to the planning board, and we will open QA 2020-03B, text amendment 6.8.1 of the UDO.
Okay, this is part 2 of the quarterly text amendments tonight. Once again, has to do with conservation subdivisions. Much to our surprise, as we were going through reviewing a couple conservation subdivisions that came in, it was discovered that our current regulations do not require sidewalks within conservation subdivisions, which seems very contrary, at least from a staff's point of view, to the town policy to really encourage pedestrian activity. We do understand that with conservation subdivision, there's a little, we do have certain incentives for infill development in those situations and certain deviations from other provisions of the UDO. But this deviation was a bit farther than what we could feel comfortable continuing on with. As I noted, currently, and this is not in Zebulon, none of these pictures are in Zebulon, I should note that. But currently, our regulations do not require any sidewalks within conservation subdivision. So staff is proposing a text amendment to section 6.8.1 of the UDO that would require sidewalks on at least one side of local streets. And local is a designation. It's where you would have your driveways and the fronts of your houses and everything else. So sidewalks on at least one side of those streets. And then for collectors and arterial roads, it would require them on both sides. The rationale behind that is arterial and collector streets have higher traffic volumes, whereas local streets, it's a lot easier to cross anywhere in the street to get to the sidewalk. And with that, I'm available if you have any questions.
Just a curiosity question. I would understand that the front yard, side yard requirements would be different in the architectural subdivision than in the standard subdivision. So how much, and I'm for putting sidewalks in, how much of a yard would be eaten up with that?
Well, the sidewalks would be placed in the public right-of-way anyways, so there would be no portion of their legal parcel in terms of the front yard setbacks.
Well, I
That would not
understand
modify
that. Okay. What are the yard setback requirements, the difference?
I do not recall what they are off the top of my head. It varies based on base zoning district, but they are narrower than what would be for a traditional subdivision.
Right, I would expect that. Yeah, I wasn't thinking about public right of way. I just flipped the switch off. Okay, thank you. Other questions? Planning board? Okay. Anyone that cares to speak back there? All right, we'll close the public hearing and refer the matter to the planning board, and I'll call for a motion to adjourn.
Move to adjourn?
Second?
We're adjourned.